Mike Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the sterile brightness of the Selthren briefing chamber casting harsh shadows over his face. His eyes flicked from one alien figure to the next, each of them gazing at him with unnerving precision. Their emerald skins seemed to shimmer under the lights, their elongated faces serene but unyielding. Mike glanced at the two other human representatives seated beside him, Jared Callahan, a tall, broad-shouldered engineer with a perpetual smirk, and Ben Yates, a wiry linguistics expert with a fidgety demeanor. Together, the three of them had been chosen for this unprecedented cultural exchange. Mike wondered, not for the first time, if they'd made a mistake picking him. Counselor Lellery, the Selthrin liaison, stood at the head of the room. Her voice was melodic, her tone measured. "Welcome to our station. As you are aware, this program is designed to promote mutual understanding. We are particularly interested in observing and learning about the human concept of courtship and interpersonal bonds." Mike leaned over toward Jared and whispered, "Courtship? They mean dating, right?" Jared snorted softly. "Yeah, but when they say it, it sounds like we're wildlife being studied." "Captain Reynolds," Lellery said, and Mike straightened in his seat. "As the designated cultural coordinator, you will lead the initial demonstrations. Mr. Callahan and Mr. Yates, your roles are equally crucial. We hope your collective experiences will provide us with a comprehensive perspective." Mike glanced at his colleagues. Ben was already scribbling notes on his data pad, his lips moving soundlessly as he translated the Selthrin language into English. Jared leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk widening. Lellery continued, "Our people approach relationships from a purely pragmatic standpoint. We wish to understand the emotional and social nuances that appear to drive human connections. Your first task will be to outline the basic steps of courtship, from initial meeting to what you call dating." "Sure," Mike said, his voice overly casual. "I'll just put on a little seminar about first dates." "No problem at all." Jared chuckled, and even Ben allowed himself a brief smile. But Lellery didn't appear to notice the humor. She nodded gravely. "Excellent. We will arrange a demonstration chamber for tomorrow's session. For now, please make yourselves comfortable. My aide will escort you to your quarters." The three men followed a silent, slender Selthrin attendant down a gleaming corridor. The station's interior was immaculate, all smooth surfaces and subtle ambient lighting. The hum of distant machinery vibrated beneath their feet. Jared broke the silence first. "Courtship demonstrations," he said, shaking his head. "Bet you never thought you'd be teaching aliens how to date, huh?" "Nope," Mike said. "But at least they didn't ask us to show them how to fight." "They probably already know how to do that," Ben muttered, his gaze fixed on his notes. "Besides, it's not about the physical aspects of relationships. They're trying to understand the emotional bonds." Jared raised an eyebrow. "You think the Selthrins even feel emotions the same way we do?" "Guess we'll find out," Mike said, hoping to end the debate. "But let's not overthink it. Our job is to share what we know, not figure out how their minds work." When they reached their quarters, the men settled into the alien accommodations. The rooms were sparsely furnished but not uncomfortable. A wide window revealed a breathtaking view of a distant nebula, its colors shifting slowly like a cosmic lava lamp. Mike found himself drawn to the sight, his thoughts drifting back to Earth. This was his first time off-planet, and despite the privilege of representing humanity, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown. "Hey," Jared said, snapping Mike out of his reverie. "We should prep for tomorrow. Come up with a plan so we don't make total fools of ourselves." "Yeah," Mike agreed, pulling up his tablet. "Let's map out the steps they want us to cover. Start simple, initial contact, building trust, then, what? First date, maybe?" Ben nodded. "Sounds good. We should also think about how to explain the nonverbal cues. They'll probably have a million questions about body language, tone, and facial expressions." "Right," Mike said. "But let's keep it straightforward. We don't want to overwhelm them." Jared smirked. "So we just walk in and say, Step 1, make eye contact. Step 2, compliment their outfit. Step 3, order dinner and don't talk with your mouth full." Mike chuckled. "Pretty much." Ben frowned. "It's more complex than that. We need to explain how these actions build a connection. They're not just steps, they're signals of trust and interest." "Relax, Ben," Jared said, tossing a pillow at him. "We'll keep it simple. Start with the basics and build from there." Mike smiled at their banter. For all their differences, the three of them worked well together. He felt a bit more confident knowing they'd face tomorrow's challenge as a team. The next day, the demonstration chamber turned out to be an open, amphitheater-like space with a raised platform in the center. Seltharan observers, scientists, counselors, and cultural analysts sat in concentric tiers, their attention focused solely on the humans. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation. Lellery approached the platform, her elegant stride drawing all eyes. She turned to Mike and the others. "When you are ready, please begin. We will ask questions as needed." Mike stepped onto the platform, feeling every eye on him. He took a deep breath and started talking. "So, courtship. On Earth, it often starts with a simple conversation. You meet someone, introduce yourself, and try to find common ground. A shared interest, a joke, something that establishes a connection." He turned to Jared. "Jared, why don't you show them how you'd start a conversation?" Jared sauntered over, feigning nonchalance. "Sure thing. Hi, I'm Jared. I couldn't help but notice you have great taste in, I don't know, star charts." Mike groaned, but the Seltharans seemed fascinated. One of them raised a hand. "Is the mention of star charts intended as a compliment?" "Sort of," Mike said. "It's a light-hearted way to start talking. The idea is to show interest without coming on too strong." Lellery nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Proceed." Next, Mike explained how humans often build trust through small gestures. Offering a drink, helping carry something, or simply listening. Ben demonstrated this by pretending to pick up a dropped item and returning it with a smile. The Seltharans watched intently, their heads tilting in unison as if absorbing every nuance. As the demonstration continued, Mike found himself relaxing. They weren't just standing in front of a crowd. They were sharing something genuine. He could tell that even Jared, who usually hid behind humor, was taking it seriously. And Ben's attention to detail helped clarify the points they made. By the end of the session, Lellery stepped forward again. "Thank you for this introduction. We have learned much already. With your continued guidance, I believe we can gain a more profound understanding of your rituals." Mike met her gaze and nodded. "We're happy to help." As they left the chamber, Jared clapped Mike on the back. "Not bad, Captain. I think they might even start dating each other if we keep this up." "Let's not push our luck," Mike said, but he smiled. In this strange, alien environment, he felt for the first time that they might actually make a difference. Chapter 2. The Demonstration. Mike paced back and forth on the smooth, sterile floor of the demonstration chamber, running through what he would say. He glanced at the others. Jared leaned casually against the wall, tossing a small metallic cube in one hand, while Ben adjusted his jacket for the 10th time. The overhead lights hummed faintly, and the air was thick with anticipation. In a few minutes, they would be standing in front of dozens of Seltharan observers, trying to explain something as complex and personal as human relationships. "All right," Mike began, stopping in place. "The first thing they need to understand is how we meet people, how we break the ice." Jared caught the cube and spun it in his hand. "Simple. You see someone you like, you walk up, say hi, and hope you don't make an ass of yourself." "Sure, but they'll want more than that," Mike replied. "They'll ask why certain approaches work and why others don't. We need to give them context." Ben adjusted his collar. "We should mention social cues, like how smiling helps ease tension or how maintaining eye contact shows interest." Mike nodded. "Exactly. And we need to show them a real-life example." "Jared, you're up." Jared raised an eyebrow. "What? Why me?" "Because you're the most natural at this kind of thing. Just pretend you're meeting someone for the first time. Keep it light, keep it casual." "I'll be the other person." Jared groaned, but he straightened up and strolled over. "Hey, how's it going?" he said, flashing a grin. "Not bad. How about you?" Mike replied, keeping his tone friendly but neutral. "I'm good. Hey, I couldn't help but notice you're reading that book on 20th century jazz. I'm a huge jazz fan. Mind if I ask what you think of it?" Mike pretended to look surprised. "Really? Most people I talk to haven't even heard of this author. I just started reading it, but so far, I'm impressed." Jared nodded. "Same here. I think the author's got a great way of breaking down complex ideas. There's a live jazz performance downtown this weekend. You should check it out. Maybe we'll run into each other. Sounds good, Mike said, ending the exchange. He turned back to Ben. See? Nothing complicated. Just a natural conversation where you find common ground and leave the door open for more interaction. Ben scribbled a note on his pad. So we emphasize mutual interests and open-ended invites. Got it. Exactly, Mike said. The key is making the other person feel comfortable, like you're genuinely interested in what they have to say. A chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the arrival of the Southern observers. The three men quickly straightened up as Counselor Lellery entered, followed by a small entourage of Southern analysts and cultural specialists. Lellery's presence was as poised as ever, her emerald skin catching the light in a way that made her seem almost luminous. "Thank you for preparing this demonstration," she said, her voice calm but expectant. "Our people are eager to understand the subtleties of your interpersonal bonding rituals. You may proceed." Mike glanced at his teammates, then stepped forward. "To start, we're going to demonstrate a basic introduction scenario. Jared here will show how humans typically approach a new acquaintance." Lellery nodded and motioned for the analysts to take notes. Jared gave Mike a look that said, "Why me?" But Mike just gestured for him to begin. Jared took a deep breath, then adopted his easygoing demeanor. "Hi," he said, pretending to greet Mike for the first time. "I'm Jared. I noticed you were reading that jazz book. Are you a big fan of the genre?" Mike responded naturally, just as they'd rehearsed. The two exchanged pleasantries, and Jared mentioned the hypothetical concert again. When they finished, Mike turned to the Southrons. "As you can see," he explained, "it's a simple conversation starter. The goal is to show genuine interest and make the other person feel at ease. In this case, Jared mentioned a mutual interest, in this example jazz, and used it as a foundation to connect. One of the analysts raised a hand. "Why is mutual interest necessary?" "It's not always necessary," Ben interjected, stepping up. "But it helps. When you find something you both enjoy, it makes the conversation flow more naturally. It also shows that you value their thoughts and experiences, which helps build trust." Another Southern spoke. "What happens if the other person does not share the interest?" Mike answered, "That happens all the time. If the first topic doesn't resonate, you try another approach. Maybe you ask about their hobbies, their job, or even something light like the weather. The idea is to find common ground that makes both people feel comfortable talking." Lellery tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "So the initial meeting is about exploration, seeking a point of connection that leads to further interaction." "That's a great way to put it," Mike said. "It's about making the other person feel comfortable enough to keep the conversation going." The Southern observers murmured among themselves, their shimmering pens scratching on translucent pads. Mike could see their curiosity growing. Their stoic faces didn't betray much, but the frequency of their questions made it clear they were intrigued. Jared, sensing the shift, grinned and leaned in slightly. "If you think that's interesting, wait until we get to the part about subtle signals, like how we use body language to show we're interested without even saying it outright." One of the analysts perked up. "Body language? What do you mean?" Ben took over. "Body language is a nonverbal way we communicate. For example, if someone leans in while talking, it often means they're engaged. If they make consistent eye contact, it can signal confidence and interest. A smile, a slight tilt of the head, even the way you stand. These all send signals about how you feel toward the other person." The Southern leaned back, nodding slowly. "So it is not only the words spoken, but also the physical cues that convey intent." "Exactly," Ben said. "You can say one thing, but if your body language doesn't match, it can create confusion. Learning to read these cues is a big part of understanding human interactions." As the discussion continued, the atmosphere in the chamber grew more relaxed. The Southrons, though still formal, seemed more open to asking follow-up questions. Jared's natural charisma kept things lively, while Ben's precise explanations grounded the discussion in clear, understandable terms. Mike kept things on track, making sure they covered each point without overwhelming their audience. By the end of the session, Lellery stepped forward again. Thank you for this demonstration. It is fascinating to see how your species navigates the complexities of forming connections. We have much to consider and discuss. Mike nodded. We're happy to answer any more questions. Just let us know. Lellery's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned to her colleagues. We will convene again tomorrow. For now, let us reflect on what we have observed. As the Selthrons filed out, Mike turned to Jared and Ben. I think that went well. They're definitely interested. Jared grinned. They might be too interested. Did you see how they were scribbling down every little detail? Ben shrugged. That's the whole point. The more they understand, the better. Sure, Jared said. But let's hope they don't start asking us to demonstrate anything more personal. Mike laughed. One step at a time, Jared. One step at a time. Chapter 3, Crossing Boundaries. The station's atmosphere never seemed to change, always cool, sterile, with a faint hum of power flowing through its endless halls. But today felt different. Mike couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he sensed an odd tension in the air as he, Jared, and Ben gathered in their quarters. All right, Mike said, setting his tablet on the glassy surface of the table. Let's talk strategy. Yesterday was about the basics, introductions, first impressions. Today, we move into something more nuanced, building trust and expressing interest. Jared leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. You mean like, do you come here often? And what's your sign? Ben rolled his eyes. No, Jared. More like how we show someone we value their opinion or how we indicate that we're genuinely listening. Exactly, Mike said. It's not just about words. It's the little things, tone, body language, knowing when to ask a question instead of giving an answer. Jared snorted. You're telling me they don't already know that? These aliens are supposed to be geniuses. They can build a station bigger than Manhattan, but they can't figure out how to say, I like you. They're not wired like us, Ben replied, flipping through his notes. Their communication is almost entirely logical. When they show interest, it's because it serves a purpose. It's transactional. What we're teaching them is how to engage with someone on an emotional level. Fine, Jared said, waving his hand. So what's the plan? We'll start by discussing how humans show trust, Mike said. For example, sharing personal stories or admitting vulnerability. Ben looked skeptical. Do you really think they'll get that? The whole sharing feelings thing isn't exactly in their DNA. Mike shrugged. They asked to learn about human relationships. This is part of it. We just need to present it in a way they can relate to. Let's keep it straightforward, maybe use some simple role-play scenarios. Jared perked up. Role-play, huh? I call dibs on being the charming rogue. Mike smirked. Just try to keep it professional, Jared. As the group prepared their materials, the door chimed. It slid open, revealing Counselor Lellery. Her graceful, deliberate movements and tranquil expression immediately caught their attention. She glanced at each of them before speaking. Greetings. The observation team is ready for today's session. Shall we proceed? Mike stood, motioning for Jared and Ben to follow. Lead the way. Lellery turned, her shimmering green skin catching the light, and began walking down the corridor. Mike fell into step beside her, glancing at her profile. She carried herself with an air of quiet authority, her posture impeccable, her gaze steady. He couldn't help but admire how composed she always seemed. You have reviewed the material for today's discussion? Lellery asked without looking at him. Yes, Mike replied. We'll start with trust-building strategies and move into ways humans express interest non-verbally. It's all pretty straightforward. Lellery nodded. Good. The analysts have expressed keen interest in these topics. We look forward to your insights. When they entered the demonstration chamber, the rows of Selthorn observers were already seated, their faces calm and unreadable. The faint hum of the station's systems filled the room, underscoring the quiet anticipation. Mike took the lead again, stepping onto the platform. Jared and Ben stood slightly behind him, ready to jump in when needed. Lellery remained near the front, her presence a constant reminder that every word was being scrutinized. Today we're going to discuss how humans establish trust and show interest in one another, Mike began. These are the building blocks of deeper connections. Without trust, it's difficult to move forward in any relationship. Jared stepped forward, his tone light. You could think of trust like a foundation. If you build it strong, everything that comes after has a better chance of lasting. Ben added, it's not just about big gestures, either. It's the small, consistent actions, listening when someone speaks, remembering details they share, showing them they matter. Lellery raised a hand. What does it mean, showing them they matter? Is this a tangible action or something more abstract? Mike, though. Omionde matter, you're saying, I value you not because I have to, but because I want to. Another Selthran analyst spoke up. If trust is so fundamental, how does one recover it if it is lost? Jared rubbed his chin. That's a tough one. Regaining trust takes time and effort. You have to prove, through consistent actions, that you're reliable again. It's not something that happens overnight. The analyst nodded, jotting down notes on their sleek, translucent pad. Lellery stepped closer to the platform. You have spoken of trust. What of the next step? Expressing interest. Ben answered, interest is about showing someone that you want to get to know them better. In human terms, this could mean asking thoughtful questions, sharing your own experiences, or simply spending time with them. Spending time? Lellery asked. Do you mean engaging in shared activities? Exactly, Mike said. Doing something together helps you bond. It shows the other person that you enjoy their company and that you're interested in learning more about them. Jared grinned. And sometimes, it's the simple things, like going for a walk, having a meal, or talking about your favorite music. It doesn't have to be complicated. Lellery's gaze shifted to Mike. You mentioned nonverbal expressions of interest. Can you demonstrate? Mike hesitated, then stepped forward. Nonverbal expressions can include things like maintaining eye contact, smiling, or leaning in slightly when someone speaks. For example, if someone shares a story, you might nod along or raise your eyebrows to show you're engaged. Ben added, it's also about mirroring the other person's energy. If they're enthusiastic, you reflect that enthusiasm. If they're quieter, you dial it down. It's a way of showing that you're in tune with them. Jared leaned toward Ben, pretending to look interested. So, tell me more about your favorite linguistic theories. Ben rolled his eyes but played along. Well, there's a fascinating debate around universal grammar. Jared smiled, exaggerating his body language. Tell me more. The Selthran observers remained stoic, but a few raised their pens to take notes. Lellery nodded slowly. I understand now. Interest is communicated not only through words, but through physical alignment and attentiveness. Mike smiled. Exactly. Sometimes actions speak louder than words. As the session drew to a close, the Selthran's questions became more detailed. They seemed particularly fascinated by how humans balanced verbal and nonverbal cues, and how trust evolved over time. Mike, Jared, and Ben answered to the best of their ability, occasionally cracking jokes to keep things light. When the last question was answered, Lellery stepped forward. Your explanations have provided valuable insight. I believe our understanding is growing steadily. Thank you for your cooperation. Mike nodded. We're glad we can help. As the Selthrans filed out, Jared turned to Mike. So, what's the next lesson? Hugging? Holding hands? Mike chuckled. We'll see. Let's focus on getting through today first. Ben packed up his notes, his expression thoughtful. You know, I think they're starting to get it. Maybe not completely, but they're asking the right questions. Mike agreed. It's a good sign. They're not just observing anymore, they're trying to understand. Still, Jared said with a grin, if they ask us to demonstrate a candlelit dinner date, I'm out. Mike laughed. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Chapter 4, The First Kiss. Mike stepped into the demonstration chamber and immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. The Selthrans, usually so calm and composed, were seated slightly forward in their chairs. Their posture, while still restrained, suggested anticipation. Even Jared, who typically slouched during these sessions, stood straighter. Ben had his tablet ready, scrolling through notes, a look of concentration on his face. At the center of the room, Lellery waited. She was always there to guide and observe, her elegant figure a reminder of the cultural gap they were trying to bridge. Today, though, there was something different in the way she held herself. She turned to Mike as he approached, her luminous eyes steady. Captain Reynolds, she began, her voice carrying its usual composed tone, today we would like you to elaborate on the practice you call kissing. You have mentioned it before as an expression of affection and interest. Mike blinked, momentarily thrown off by the directness of the request. He glanced over at Jared and Ben. Jared smirked, and Ben looked like he was praying Mike wouldn't say something embarrassing. Mike started, scratching the back of his neck. Sure. Kissing is, well, it's a gesture that's both personal and intimate. It's not just about physical contact, it's a way of showing someone you care about them, that you're interested in them. One of the Seltheran analysts raised a hand. Is the act of pressing lips together the primary method, or are there other forms? Primarily the lips, Mike said. But it can also involve the cheek, the forehead. The intention behind the kiss is what matters. It's a signal of affection, of trust. Lellery tilted her head slightly. So it is a nonverbal indicator of emotional connection? Exactly, Mike replied. It's about expressing feelings without needing to say a word. You don't just kiss anyone, it's reserved for someone special. Jared cleared his throat and leaned over. You gonna explain it or demonstrate it? Mike shot him a look. We'll stick to explaining for now. Coward, Jared muttered, earning a stifled chuckle from Ben. Lellery turned her gaze toward Jared, then back to Mike. I believe a demonstration might be helpful. Theory alone may not convey the significance of the act. Mike froze. A demonstration? Here? Now? Yes, Lellery said simply. If you were comfortable, Captain Reynolds, it would greatly aid our understanding. Mike could feel his pulse quickening. This wasn't just a casual cultural exchange anymore, it felt much more personal. But he could also see the curiosity in Lellery's expression and in the faces of the other Seltherans. They weren't mocking him, they genuinely wanted to learn. Okay, Mike said finally. But only if it's done respectfully. We're talking about an important aspect of human relationships, not a spectacle. Lellery inclined her head. We understand. Please proceed in the manner you find most appropriate. Mike glanced at Jared, who immediately raised his hands. Don't look at me, buddy. Ben? Mike asked, hopeful. Ben shook his head. No way. Not my area of expertise. That left only one option. Mike took a deep breath and stepped toward Lellery. Would you be all right with helping demonstrate? Her eyes widened slightly, then returned to their calm neutrality. If it will aid our understanding, I will participate. She stepped closer to Mike, and the room seemed to grow quieter. The Seltherans watched intently, their pens poised over their notepads. Even Jared and Ben seemed to hold their breath. Mike stood a foot away from Lellery, hesitating. Okay, he said softly, more to himself than to her. It's just a quick demonstration. Lellery waited, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. Mike could feel the warmth radiating from her as he closed the distance. He placed his hands lightly on her shoulders, mindful of her personal space, and leaned in. Their lips met briefly, just a soft, simple kiss, more a gentle brush than anything else. When he pulled back, he stepped away quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned to face the observers, trying to ignore the heat rising to his face. That's a kiss, he said. A simple, introductory one. No more than that. The Seltheran analysts exchanged murmurs, their pens flying across their notes. Lellery touched her lips lightly as if testing the sensation. It is a curious gesture, she said after a moment. Not unpleasant, but unusual. It's about what it symbolizes, Mike said quickly, eager to steer the conversation back to safer ground. It's not just physical contact, it's a way of saying, I care about you. Jared smirked again. So, how was it? Shut up, Jared, Mike muttered under his breath. Lellery, meanwhile, nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Captain Reynolds. Your willingness to demonstrate has clarified much. I believe we have a better understanding of the emotional significance. Mike let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. I'm glad it helped. As the Seltherans continued discussing their observations, Mike retreated to the back of the room, joining Jared and Ben. Smooth, Jared whispered. Really nailed that one. I swear, Jared, if you say one more word. All right. Jared held up his hands in mock surrender. But seriously, I think they actually get it now. Ben nodded. They seemed engaged. That's progress. Mike leaned against the wall, still feeling the echo of the moment. Yeah, progress. Let's hope it stays that way. Chapter 5, Uncharted Territory. Mike leaned against the smooth, translucent surface of a station viewport, staring out at the swirling nebula beyond. The colors shifted slowly, hypnotically, while the faint hum of the station's systems filled the silence. Behind him, Jared and Ben sat at a sleek table, scrolling through their notes. The three had spent hours debriefing after the previous demonstration, and the fatigue was starting to show. So, what's the plan for today? Jared asked, spinning a stylus between his fingers. Are we supposed to teach them how to hold hands next? Ben didn't look up from his tablet. More like how to build on initial interest. You know, showing genuine care. At least that's what Lellery hinted at during the briefing. Mike turned from the window and joined them at the table. We'll focus on how humans deepen relationships over time. Things like shared experiences, small gestures that show you're paying attention, and just being there for someone. Jared smirked. You make it sound so poetic. Poetry's not a bad comparison, Mike said. Relationships aren't always about the big, dramatic moments. Sometimes it's the little, consistent things that matter most. Ben looked skeptical. Think they'll understand that? The Seltherans seem more interested in clear steps than subtle nuances. Mike rubbed his temple. That's why we're here to explain it. If we can give them examples, show how humans develop trust and closeness over time, they'll get it eventually. Examples, huh? Jared leaned back in his chair. Maybe you should tell them about that time you burned spaghetti on a date and still managed to make her laugh. Mike groaned. Can we not bring that up? Hey, I'm just saying, Jared said with a grin. Real-life examples make it relatable. Before Mike could respond, the door chimed and slid open. Lellery entered, her movements as graceful and deliberate as always. She inclined her head in greeting. Captain Reynolds, Mr. Callahan, Mr. Yates, she said. The observation team is ready. Shall we begin? Mike rose from his seat. Sure. Let's do this. They followed Lellery down the corridor, her quiet confidence guiding the way. As they walked, Mike couldn't help but notice how the light from the station's panels seemed to catch the subtle iridescence of her skin. She was different from the humans he'd known, but there was a warmth to her presence that felt familiar. When they arrived at the demonstration chamber, the Seltheran observers were already seated. Their calm, analytical gazes followed the humans as they stepped onto the platform. Mike took his usual position at the front, Jared and Ben flanking him. Lellery stood slightly to the side, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Today, Mike began, we're going to talk about how humans deepen relationships. Once you've established trust and interest, the next step is showing that you care about the other person as an individual. Jared jumped in, his tone casual. It's like leveling up. You start with the basics, hi, how are you, nice to meet you. And then you start adding in the little things, like remembering their favorite coffee order, or knowing when they've had a tough day and giving them space. Ben nodded. It's also about shared experiences, doing things together, whether it's cooking a meal, taking a walk, or working on a project, helps you understand each other better. It creates a sense of connection that words alone can't. A Seltheran analyst raised a hand. Are these experiences planned, or do they occur spontaneously? Both, Mike said. Sometimes you plan a nice dinner or a fun outing, but other times it's the unexpected moments that mean the most, like helping someone when they're not feeling well, or being there to celebrate when something good happens. Another analyst asked, you mentioned remembering preferences. Why is that important? Because it shows you're paying attention, Mike explained. When you remember someone's likes and dislikes, it tells them that they matter to you. It's a way of saying, I see you, and I care about the details of your life. Jared grinned. Like how Mike always remembers to bring me coffee when we're running late. Mike rolled his eyes. Don't push it. The Seltherans exchanged murmurs, their pens flying across their notes. Lellery stepped forward slightly. It seems that your actions, both planned and spontaneous, convey deeper emotions. Are there specific behaviors that consistently strengthen these bonds? Mike nodded. Definitely. Showing support during tough times, being honest and open, making the other person feel appreciated. These are all ways humans reinforce their connections. It's not about grand gestures. It's about consistency and authenticity. Ben added, it's also important to listen. Really listen. When someone knows they can talk to you and be heard without judgment, it builds a stronger foundation for the relationship. Jared leaned in. And don't forget humor. Making each other laugh can lighten the mood and remind you why you enjoy being around each other in the first place. One of the analysts raised a hand again. What role does physical closeness play in these relationships? Mike hesitated for a moment, then answered carefully. Physical closeness, like holding hands or hugging, can help convey affection and reassurance. But it's always about what's comfortable for both people. It's not the physical act itself that matters most. It's the meaning behind it. Lellery nodded. I see. It is not merely a physical action, but a representation of emotional security and trust. Exactly, Mike said. It's about showing someone they're valued and cared for in a way that feels natural to both of you. The discussion continued with the Seltherans posing more detailed questions about how humans balance verbal and nonverbal communication. Mike, Jared, and Ben shared examples from their own experiences, making the abstract concepts more tangible. The analysts seemed genuinely engaged, their usual detachment giving way to thoughtful curiosity. As the session wrapped up, Lellery approached Mike. Your explanations today have been illuminating. It is clear that these small, consistent gestures carry great significance in human relationships. Mike smiled. I'm glad it's making sense. The more we can share, the better. Lellery's gaze lingered on him for a moment. You and your team have done well. Thank you for your continued efforts. Thanks, Mike said, feeling a subtle warmth at her words. As the Seltheran observers filed out, Jared clapped Mike on the shoulder. Hey, you were pretty smooth up there. Thanks, Mike said. I think they're starting to get it. Ben nodded. They're asking better questions. That's a good sign. Yeah, Jared added. But if they want us to demonstrate any more deepening bonds, you're on your own, Mike. Mike laughed. Let's just take it one step at a time. Chapter 6, A New Understanding. The steady hum of the station's systems was a familiar background now, a constant reminder of just how far they were from home. Mike, Jared, and Ben sat in their quarters, sipping tea from the oddly shaped Seltheran mugs. The three of them were reviewing the latest round of notes from the cultural exchange sessions. Jared lounged in his chair, one leg thrown over the armrest, while Ben sat stiffly upright as if bracing himself for an exam. So, Jared began, flipping through his tablet. Today's big theme is, what exactly? Partnership, Mike replied. How humans work together to overcome challenges, how they support each other in difficult times. Basically, we're going to show them how relationships grow stronger through shared effort. Ben adjusted his glasses. It's more than that. They're looking for examples of emotional support. Times when people step up for each other, not because they have to, but because they want to. Jared rolled his eyes. Great. We're the poster boys for intergalactic sensitivity now. Mike chuckled. It's not about being sensitive, Jared. It's about showing them what makes human connections meaningful. They're trying to understand how we build lasting bonds. If we can explain it clearly, we might actually help them see relationships the way we do. Yeah, Jared said, leaning back. But just once, I'd like to teach them something cool, like how to throw a proper barbecue or play poker. Ben smirked. Maybe next week. For now, let's focus on what they asked for. Mike leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The key point we need to get across is that strong relationships aren't just built on good times. They're built on how people handle the hard times. It's about being there for each other, even when things get tough. Jared raised an eyebrow. So we're basically teaching them to be each other's backup plan? Not exactly, Mike said. It's about showing them that when you truly care about someone, you don't bail when things get difficult. You help carry the load. Ben tapped his tablet. We should start with a simple example. Something relatable. Maybe how friends help each other through personal setbacks. Jared perked up. Oh, like that time I fixed your car after you ran over a nail? Mike laughed. That's not exactly what I had in mind, but sure, we could use that. It's a straightforward example of someone stepping up to help without expecting anything in return. As they brainstormed scenarios, the door chime sounded. Lellery entered, her movements as graceful as always. She inclined her head in greeting. Captain Reynolds. Mr. Callahan. Mr. Yates. The observation team is ready. Mike stood, nodding. We're ready too. Let's get started. They followed her down the corridor, the polished floors reflecting their steps. Jared kept the mood light, cracking jokes about how they were becoming relationship counselors for an entire alien race. Ben, as usual, focused on his notes, muttering details under his breath. Mike stayed quiet, mentally reviewing their approach. He wanted to make sure they got this right. When they arrived in the demonstration chamber, the Seltheran analysts were already seated, their pens poised over their translucent tablets. The room's atmosphere felt different today, less formal, almost expectant. Mike stepped up to the platform, Jared and Ben flanking him as usual, while Lellery remained off to the side, her presence steadying as ever. Today, Mike began, we're practical assistance, or simply being there when someone needs you. It's about showing that you're reliable, that you care. One of the analysts raised a hand. What constitutes emotional support? Is it a verbal exchange or something more? Both, Mike said. Emotional support can be as simple as listening when someone needs to talk. Can also mean offering reassurance, letting them know they're not alone. Sometimes it's just about being present, giving someone the sense that you're in this together. Another analyst asked, how does one know when support is needed? Jared stepped forward. It's not always obvious. Sometimes people tell you straight up, hey, I need help. Other times you have to pick up on subtle cues. Like if they seem more withdrawn than usual or if they're acting out of character. Mike nodded. And that's where trust comes in. If you have a strong bond with someone, you're more likely to notice when something's off. You start to understand their rhythms, their moods. That connection helps you recognize when to step in and offer support. The analysts scribbled furiously, their faces still calm but their pens moving at a rapid pace. Lellery spoke up, her tone thoughtful. So the act of providing support is both proactive and reactive. It requires attentiveness and a willingness to respond. Exactly, Ben said. It's not just about fixing problems. Sometimes just being there, showing that you care, is enough. The discussion continued, with Mike, Jared, and Ben sharing personal anecdotes and explaining how different kinds of support strengthened relationships. They talked about small gestures, like checking in on a friend who's feeling down, and larger commitments such as helping someone through a major life change. The Selthrans listened intently, their questions growing more detailed as they tried to grasp the emotional nuances. As the session drew to a close, Lellery stepped forward once more. Your insights today have been invaluable. It seems that human relationships are far more complex and dynamic than we initially understood. Mike smiled. I'm glad we could help clarify things. Relationships are never simple, but that's what makes them meaningful. Lellery nodded. Your willingness to share personal experiences has been most enlightening. I believe we have much to reflect on. The Selthran analysts began to file out, their heads bent over their notes. Jared turned to Mike with a grin. You know, I think they might actually start writing self-help books after all this. Ben chuckled. Wouldn't that be something? How to Build a Better Bond, by the Selthran Council. Mike laughed. Who knows? Maybe they'll teach us a thing or two before this is over. Lellery lingered as the others left. She looked at Mike, her expression calm yet curious. Captain Reynolds, may I ask a personal question? Sure, Mike said. What's on your mind? How did you learn these behaviors? She asked. Is it something you were taught, or did you develop them through experience? Mike thought for a moment. A bit of both, I guess. Some things I learned from my family, from watching how they cared for each other. Other things I picked up through trial and error, figuring out what works, what doesn't. It's an ongoing process. Lellery nodded. So these bonds you describe are not static. They evolve over time. Exactly, Mike said. That's part of what makes them so rewarding. They're not perfect, and they're not always easy. But when you put in the effort, they can grow into something really meaningful. She tilted her head, her gaze steady. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I find it intriguing. You're welcome, Mike said, his smile genuine. I'm glad it helped. Lellery turned to leave, but not before giving him a small, almost imperceptible nod. As the door closed behind her, Jared leaned over to Mike. So, what do you think that was about? Mike shrugged. Not sure. Maybe she's just trying to understand how we think. Or maybe, Jared said with a smirk, she's starting to see why humans are so fascinating. Mike shook his head, smiling. You never quit, do you? Nope, Jared said, laughing. Never.